CEO came to town to shut down her cafe, the waitress whispered, "You're the firefighter who pulled me out. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far our stories travel." Ethan Cross didn't want to be in this town, didn't want to drive 3 hours through winding Vermont back roads just to close down some failing cafe his company had targeted for acquisition. But his boss had been crystal clear on the phone that morning. You go personally, make the assessment, get her to sign, and shut it down by end of month. No exceptions. So here he was, pulling up to Riverside Cafe in his black Audi, loosening his tie and telling himself this was just another business deal. Nothing personal, just numbers on a spreadsheet that didn't add up anymore. The cafe sat on the corner of Main Street, looking like it had been there forever. Brick faced with ivy creeping up the sides, big windows with handwritten specials taped to the glass, and a wooden sign that had seen better days swinging gently in the autumn breeze. He'd done his homework on the flight up, knew the owner was a single mom in her late 20s who'd inherited the place from her parents and was drowning in debt trying to keep it alive. Easy target, his boss had said. She'll fold once you show her the numbers. Ethan pushed open the door, and a little bell chimed, the kind of sound that belonged in a different era, and immediately the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls hit him harder than he expected. The place was half full, locals mostly, older folks reading newspapers, a couple of college kids with laptops, everyone looking comfortable like they'd been coming here their whole lives. He slid into a corner booth near the window, pulled out his tablet, and started reviewing the acquisition file. That's when she walked over. Blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing jeans and a faded Riverside Cafe t-shirt, holding a coffee pot in one hand and a notepad in the other. And the second their eyes met, something weird happened. She froze mid-step, her face going pale like she'd just seen a ghost, and the coffee pot in her hand started shaking so bad he thought she might drop it. "Hi, welcome to Riverside," she managed to say, her voice coming out shakier than it should have. "Can I get you some coffee?" Ethan nodded. "Black, please." She poured it, but her hand was trembling so much the coffee sloshed over the rim onto the saucer, and she kept staring at him like she was trying to solve some impossible puzzle. He noticed the name tag pinned to her shirt, Maya, and underneath it in smaller letters, owner. "Do I know you?" he asked, because the way she was looking at him was starting to make him uncomfortable. Maya blinked fast, shaking her head. "No, sorry, you just remind me of someone. My mistake." But she didn't move away from the table, just kept standing there studying his face, his hands, the scar on his left knuckle from a burn he'd gotten years ago. Before he could say anything else, a little girl came running out from the back room, maybe 6 years old with dark curls bouncing, wearing a pink dress covered in paint stains. And she was laughing until the fire alarm in the kitchen started beeping, that low battery warning sound. The second that beep echoed through the cafe, the little girl's entire face changed, hands flying up to cover her ears, eyes going wide with panic. "Sophie, baby, it's okay," Maya said, dropping to her knees and pulling the kid into her arms. "It's just the battery, remember? Not a real fire. You're safe." But Sophie was already crying, her whole body shaking, and Maya started doing this thing where she rocked her gently and whispered a story Ethan could barely hear. "Remember the brave firefighter, sweetheart? The one who saved Mommy when she was scared? He kept her safe, and you're safe too, just like Mommy was." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he'd spent 10 years trying to bury, and he looked away, focusing hard on his tablet screen, like the numbers there could block out the sound of that little girl's fear. Maya pulled out her phone, showed Sophie a photo, something old and grainy, and the kid's breathing started to slow down. Ethan glanced over without meaning to, and caught a glimpse of the photo, a hospital room, someone in firefighter gear sitting beside a bed. And just for a second, something flickered in his memory, something he couldn't quite grab hold of. Maya noticed him looking and quickly put the phone away, her eyes locking on to his again with this expression he couldn't read, something between hope and terror. His phone buzzed. Text from his boss. "Status? Close the deal. Café shuts in 30 days. Ethan typed back, "Working on it." But when he looked up, Maya was still watching him from across the room, whispering something under her breath he couldn't hear. It can't be him. Please, God, don't let it be him. Maya couldn't sleep that night, kept staring at the old hospital photo on her phone, and then pulling up the cafe security footage from that afternoon, freezing the frame on Ethan's face and comparing them side by side until her eyes burned. Same strong jawline, same way his left eyebrow raised, just slightly higher than his right, same burn scar on his knuckle that she remembered seeing when he'd held her hand all those years ago. She zoomed in on his hands in the footage, the way he gripped his coffee cup with his thumb on the outside, instead of wrapped around like most people, and her heart just about stopped because that was exactly how the firefighter in her memory used to hold things, careful and controlled like he was always ready to put something down fast and run toward danger. The next morning she watched him walk into the cafe again, same expensive suit, same leather bag, and this time she paid attention to everything, the way he moved, the slight limp in his right leg that he tried to hide, the unconscious way he scanned every room for exits like old training that never quite left. He ordered the same black coffee and pulled out his laptop, and Maya caught herself staring so hard that one of the regulars had to clear their throat twice before she noticed they needed a refill. Ethan spent 3 days coming back, always sitting in the same corner booth, always working on his laptop, and Maya started noticing things that made her stomach twist. He wasn't just some random businessman passing through. He was taking notes, watching how many customers came in, how long the old espresso machine took to heat up, the way the ceiling fan wobbled because the mounting was loose. She saw him photograph the outdated menu board in the crack in the front window that she couldn't afford to fix. An alarm bell started going off in her head. Thursday afternoon during the lunch rush, Maya's commercial oven started making this grinding sound that meant the heating element was dying, and she watched Ethan's eyes flick toward the kitchen, watched him type something on his laptop, and she'd had enough. The second the cafe emptied out around 2 o'clock, she walked straight over to his table and slid into the seat across from him without asking. "I need to know something," she said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking in her lap. "10 years ago, were you a volunteer firefighter?" Ethan's fingers froze over his keyboard, his whole body going still in a way that told her everything before he even opened his mouth. She pulled out her phone, brought up the hospital photo she'd looked at probably 10,000 times, and turned the screen toward him. The image was grainy, taken by a nurse who'd thought it was sweet, showing a young guy in firefighter gear slumped in a chair beside her hospital bed. One hand wrapped around hers, eyes closed like he'd finally let himself rest. "That's you, isn't it?" Maya whispered. "You sat with me for 8 days straight. You talked to me even though I was in a coma. You told me about your dreams, your favorite books, why you became a firefighter." Her voice cracked. "When I woke up, the nurses said you'd been there every single day, and then you just vanished." Ethan stared at the photo, and she watched his face change, watched something break open behind his eyes as memories he'd clearly buried came flooding back. "The car accident," he said, his voice rough. "Rainy night, Route 7. You were trapped in the back seat." "My parents were in the front," Maya said, tears starting to blur her vision. "They died on impact. You used the jaws of life to get me out." He nodded slowly, like he was watching it happen all over again. "You weren't breathing when we pulled you free. Your pulse was so weak I thought we'd lost you." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "I rode with you in the ambulance, stayed at the hospital because I couldn't leave until I knew you'd make it." "Why did you disappear?" Maya asked, and she hated how desperate she sounded, but she'd been carrying this question for a decade. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I got called to another emergency. House fire. Family trapped inside. By the time we got there, it was too late. There was a kid and I couldn't." He stopped, couldn't finish the sentence. "I quit the department 2 days later. Couldn't handle failing again." Maya reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand that had pulled her from twisted metal and held on while she fought her way back to life. "You didn't fail me." His phone rang, shattering the moment, and he pulled his hand back to answer it, and that's when Maya's world tilted sideways because she heard his boss's voice loud and clear through the speaker. "Ethan, what's the status on the Riverside acquisition? We need that property closed by end of month." The blood drained from Maya's face. "Acquisition?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan closed his eyes. Maya, let me explain. But she was already standing up, backing away from the table. You're not here as a customer. You're here to shut me down. It wasn't a question. The man who saved my life came back to destroy everything I have left. It's not like that, Ethan started, but Maya was already walking away, and this time she didn't look back. Ethan sat in his hotel room that night staring at his phone, his boss's number pulled up and ready to dial, and when he finally hit call, his voice came out steadier than he expected. I can't close this cafe, Richard. I'm out. The silence on the other end lasted about 3 seconds before his boss exploded. Something about breach of contract and throwing away his career and being a damn fool, but Ethan just said, then I'm a fool, and hung up. His phone buzzed immediately with a text that read, you're fired. We're sending Mitchell to finish the job. And Ethan tossed the phone onto the bed and didn't feel even a little bit bad about it. 2 days later, he was still in town, had checked out of the hotel and rented a small apartment above the hardware store because he honestly had no idea what he was doing next. But leaving felt wrong. He'd walked past Riverside Café about a dozen times, saw Maya through the window working herself into the ground, and every time he thought about going in to explain, his feet just wouldn't move. Then Friday during lunch rush, he was sitting on the bench across the street when he heard the smoke alarm go off. The real one this time, not just a low battery beep, and his entire body went into autopilot. He was through the cafe door before his brain caught up, and the scene inside was pure chaos. Black smoke was pouring out of the kitchen where the ancient oven had finally given up and caught fire. Customers were scrambling toward the exits, and Maya was trying to get the fire extinguisher off the wall while simultaneously looking for Sophie, who'd been coloring in the back corner booth. Ethan grabbed the extinguisher from her hands, shoved through the kitchen door, and put out the flames in under 30 seconds. Movements so automatic it was like the last 10 years just vanished. When he came back out, Maya was on her knees in the middle of the cafe floor, with Sophie curled into a ball, the little girl's hands clamped over her ears, eyes squeezed shut, her whole body shaking so violently it scared the hell out of him. Maya was trying everything, the breathing exercises, the calm voice, the story about the brave firefighter, but Sophie wasn't hearing any of it, just kept screaming, "Make it stop! Make it stop!" over and over until her voice went raw. Ethan dropped down beside them without thinking, his voice cutting through the noise in that low, steady tone he'd learned in training a lifetime ago. Sophie, hey, look at me, sweetheart. I need you to count with me, okay? In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Can you do that with me? He held up his hand, fingers spread wide. Watch my fingers, we'll count together. It took 3 tries, but Sophie finally opened her eyes, locked onto his hand, and started breathing with him, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with his counts. Maya watched like she was seeing a miracle happen right in front of her, tears streaming down her face as her daughter's panic slowly ebbed. When Sophie could finally talk again, she looked up at Ethan with those huge eyes and whispered, "You sound like him, the firefighter in Mommy's story." Ethan's throat closed up, but he managed to say, "Maybe I am, kiddo." Later, after the fire marshal left and the customers had been sent home, and Sophie was asleep in the back office wrapped in Maya's jacket, Maya just fell apart. She slid down the wall onto the floor, put her face in her hands and sobbed. "I can't lose this place. It's all I have left of them. My sister's tuition, the mortgage, everything depends on this cafe, and I'm failing. I'm failing everyone." Ethan sat down next to her, close but not touching. "I quit firefighting because I couldn't save everyone," he said quietly. "A kid died on my watch, and I decided if I couldn't be perfect at it, I wouldn't do it at all. So I built this whole other life where I never had to feel helpless again." He looked at her. "But those walls didn't protect me. They just made me empty." Maya lifted her head, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "So what now? You leave again?" He shook his head. "No. This time I stay, and I fight." Maya showed up to the cafe Monday morning, expecting to see a condemned building notice taped to the door. But instead, she found a brand new commercial oven being wheeled in by 2 guys in work uniforms who handed her an invoice marked "Paid in Full" with no name attached. She stood there confused as hell until her landlord called an hour later, saying someone had anonymously cleared 3 months of her back rent, and that's when she knew exactly who was behind it. She found Ethan at the park 2 blocks over, sitting on a bench with a coffee from the gas station, because he clearly wasn't welcome at her cafe anymore, and she walked right up and threw the invoice at his chest. "I don't want your guilt money," she said, voice shaking with anger that was really just fear dressed up in different clothes. Ethan picked up the paper, folded it carefully. "It's not guilt. It's an investment." "Investment in what?" she shot back. "In the woman who taught me that saving one person is enough," he said, looking at her dead on. "You survived, Maya. You built something beautiful out of tragedy. If I can help keep that alive, that's not charity. That's me finally doing something that actually matters." She wanted to stay mad, wanted to tell him to take his money and his savior complex and get lost. But before she could, her phone rang. It was her lawyer, voice tight with bad news. Ethan's old company had sent a new acquisition team, and they'd made an offer to her landlord directly, said they'd buy the building out from under her and triple his profit if he evicted her by end of month. 2 weeks later, Sophie's nightmares got so bad that Maya found her daughter awake at 3 in the morning, drawing the same picture over and over, the cafe on fire with stick figures running away. The anxiety attacks came daily now, triggered by car horns, sirens, even the coffee grinder, and Maya was at the end of her rope trying to hold everything together while watching her baby fall apart. Thursday afternoon, Sophie had an asthma attack so severe Maya had to call an ambulance, and Ethan met them at the hospital even though Maya hadn't called him. He'd just somehow known. They sat in the waiting room while doctors worked on Sophie, and Maya whispered the things she'd been too terrified to say out loud. "Maybe I should just sell. Start over somewhere else where she doesn't have to carry all this weight." Ethan stared at the sterile white floor, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too big to swallow, and then he stood up. "I'll be back," was all he said. He drove straight to his old company's headquarters, walked into his former boss's office without knocking, and said 5 words. "I want to buy it." It took every liquid asset he had, his entire savings, the trust fund he'd never touched, stock options he'd been holding on to for years, all of it gone in one signature to purchase the acquisition rights to one failing cafe in a town nobody cared about. His boss just laughed. "You're throwing away your entire future for what? Some waitress in her broken-down coffee shop?" Ethan looked him straight in the eye. "No, I'm investing in something that actually matters for the first time in my life." When he got back to the hospital, Sophie was stable and sleeping, Maya curled up in the chair beside her bed, and he sat down in the hallway and waited, because that's what you do when you finally figure out where you're supposed to be. The town meeting was packed, every seat in the community center filled with locals who'd grown up on Maya's parents' coffee and weren't ready to watch the cafe die. Maya stood at the front podium with papers shaking in her hands, about to announce that she was selling to the highest bidder because fighting wasn't worth destroying her daughter's mental health, when the back doors swung open and Ethan walked in carrying a briefcase that looked way too official for comfort. Every head turned, and Maya's heart just about stopped, because she thought he was there representing his old company, coming to deliver the final blow himself. But then he walked straight up to the podium and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maya Brennan doesn't have to sell." He pulled out a stack of documents, held them up. "I purchased the acquisition rights from Cross Hospitality 3 days ago, and as of this morning, I'm voiding the contract. Riverside Café stays open under Maya's ownership, no strings attached." The room erupted, people cheering and clapping, but Maya just stood there staring at him like he'd lost his mind. "Why?" she whispered, even though half the town was watching. "Why would you throw everything away for this?" Ethan turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying that steady calm that came from years of talking people through their worst moments. 10 years ago, I pulled Maya from a car wreck on Route 7. She was 18, barely breathing, and I sat with her in that hospital every day for over a week because I couldn't leave until I knew she'd make it. He looked at Maya. "I told her stories while she was in a coma, talked about the kind of firefighter I wanted to be, the man who saves everyone and never gives up." His voice cracked just slightly. "But then I failed someone else, and I ran. Built a whole different life where I never had to feel that helpless again. And then I walked into her cafe 2 months ago, sent there to destroy the one thing she had left, and I didn't even recognize the woman I'd saved." He turned back to Maya. You kept fighting. You survived, raised your sister, built this place into something that matters. You became the hero, not me. Before Maya could respond, Sophie came running from the back row where she'd been sitting with a neighbor, and she threw her arms around Ethan's legs. You're him. You're the guardian angel from Mommy's stories. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket, one of her drawings showing a firefighter with angel wings standing in front of the cafe, and Maya's breath caught because she'd never told Sophie what the firefighter looked like. But somehow her daughter had drawn Ethan's face perfectly. Maya walked up to him, tears streaming down her cheeks, and took his hands. You didn't just save my life that night. You gave me a reason to believe that good people still existed in a world that had just taken everything from me. She smiled through the tears. And now you're here, being that person all over again. 6 months later, the cafe looked different. New sign out front, fresh paint, equipment that actually worked, and Ethan behind the counter wearing a Riverside Cafe t-shirt instead of a suit, pulling espresso shots like he'd been doing it his whole life. Maya walked over during a quiet moment, the simple band on her left hand catching the afternoon light, and leaned against his shoulder. Best investment you ever made? She teased. He looked around at the full tables, at Sophie serving apple juice coffee to delighted customers, at the frame photos on the wall showing a young firefighter in the hospital next to a newer picture of the three of them together. No, he said, pulling her close. Coming home was because sometimes the people we save end up being the ones who save us right back. And sometimes going back to the place you ran from is the only way to finally find where you belong. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is go back to the place that broke us and choose to stay anyway. If this story reminded you that redemption is real, that second chances exist, and that the people we save often end up saving us in return, hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories that prove love and courage are always worth the fight. Click another video on your screen, because every story we tell might be the one that reminds you it's never too late to come home.